Going to appear decorous. We are decorous? Is that even? No. Like we know what we're doing. Okay. Julia, welcome back. It is Friday and these people need to go home. We are going to, all right, this was District Grand was part of looking at the proposed school districts and why they're drawn the way they are. And then part of the just talk around Brigham and, you know, if you allowed school districts, the question came up, well, what if your grand lists were all relatively similar? What, you know, it looked like half of the West Coast was in the Chittenden district. And why was that? And so Julia said she could talk to us about the grand list in the district. So we're here.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. There are 4 documents on the committee page under my name. 3 are more reference documents that conversations with members of the committee, I thought they would be helpful for you to have in your back pocket as thinking through some of these things. The 4th is a slide deck. Would you like me to go ahead and share my screen?
I think that would be helpful
Okay.
because then anyone that's watching can see it.
Sure. So while I'm sharing my screen, I want to note I do have a few like big picture notes in terms of what the presentation is and isn't getting into.
I was going to say, this looks like something Brad James would have sent us.
Well, I take that as a compliment.
It is that's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, so I've included, I erred on the side of including more numbers than fewer for all of you. But before getting into the meat of the presentation, I wanted to make a few notes, both for you and folks who may be watching, that the analysis and what we're talking through here today are the 5 districts that were presented in Governor Scott's education transformation proposal. I'm really focusing solely on the proposed districts. So there's other parts of the proposal, as you'll recall, the homestead exemption that Jake Feldman spoke about from the tax department. That's not included in this modeling. This is really solely looking at the 5 proposed districts in isolation of the rest of the proposal.
Okay.
Could we go even further back in step as to why the grand lists are important and all of that?
Absolutely. And in 2 slides, I'm going into that. I want to start like high level, putting all my caveats out, reminding everyone that JFO is nonpartisan, that this presentation is not should not be interpreted as a recommendation or lack thereof of the policy proposal. It's really just providing information to all of you.
Numbers say what the numbers say.
And finally, before getting into your question, Senator Gulick, of why are we talking about the grand list? The other piece is that we're using preliminary fiscal year 25 equalized grand list data. So this means that we're assuming that all of this grand list is 100% of fair market value. And that allows us to do a comparison from district to district, town to town, regardless of when they were last appraised. So those are my high level disclaimer notes that I like to always start out with. So we'll talk about some of the underlying pieces of the analysis, get into the grand list and why we're talking about it, and then go deeper into the 5 school districts that have been proposed, what their grand lists look like. Going to the long-term average daily membership of those districts, the pupil counts essentially. We're not talking about weights today. And then talking about the grand list per pupil. And then a few considerations just to have in mind that we're not touching on in all of the numbers.
The equalized grand list is students in seats.
So the
Or-
equalized grand list is referring to the 100% fair market value, and we'll get into that
Okay,
here. The long-term ADM, we'll
Yeah.
also talk about that in a few slides, what that means, how's that calculated. But essentially, yes, it's on average how many kids are sitting in chairs in a school.
okay.
So starting out with some of the underlying pieces of the analysis, this gets to Senator Gulick's point. Of what is the grand list and why are we talking about it? So essentially, it's the value of property in the state, in a municipality. This is established by listers and or assessors. In fiscal year 25, the total equalized, remember this is 100% of fair market value, is estimated to be about 122.4 billion.
That's everything, commercial, non-commercial.
Yes, so I am going forward into the slide deck, we'll be sort of talking about three things in terms of grand list. We'll be talking about the total grand list, so all real taxable property, right? What properties, if a property is paying an education property tax, it's included in this number. You'll recall that within Vermont's current education property tax system, we have two classes of property, homestead and non-homestead. So I've also broken it out and I think it's pretty interesting. It was interesting to watch how the state shook out in terms of this. So gonna get interesting, I promise. But I also want to just remind you that we have statewide education property taxes right now. This is a property tax rate is set for every $100 of property value. So sometimes you might look and you might think, oh, these numbers look really high for grand list value. Well, you'll recall that a tax rate is for every $100 of property value. So sometimes when looking at numbers, you might see the 122.4 billion divided by 100 because that's what the tax rate is being applied against. And lastly, why are we talking about this? Well, because the chair asked me to come in and talk about it, but really because the grand list value across districts allows us to look into a district's property wealth and see the amount of funds that could be raised locally from a certain tax rate. I do want to note that, as we all know, under current law, a school district's property wealth does not really matter in the context of Vermont's current education financing system because we have a statewide education fund. So that means that a school district's property wealth does not impact their tax rate, right? A school district's tax rate is impacted by their local spending decisions. So when thinking about moving to a system where there may be some sort of local tax based off of property tax of that district, it is different than what we have in the current law. So I just want to put out a word of caution in terms of comparing current school districts' grand list sizes to proposed school district grand list sizes, because we're also talking about potentially changing a funding structure.
So right now, if local voters vote, spend however much their school boards tell them they need or want, if they want to provide certain courses, they figure out what that's going to cost. They figure out what kind of debt service they're going to have, if they're going to build something. And that is paid for out of a statewide grand list, and their tax rate is adjusted for that local spending over or above statewide average, right? Spending.
If a school district, so we've got the homestead property tax rate, right? That's what's being adjusted by those local spending decisions. And if the school district spends below or at the homestead yield, they have a rate of $1 on homestead property tax. If they spend above the yield, then their homestead property tax rate will increase in proportion to how much they're spending above the yield.
But it has nothing to do with their local property value.
Exactly.
Okay.
So for that reason, this presentation is only focusing on the proposed 5 districts.
Right.
Because under current law, we have these district boundaries, but the grand list value within those current law districts is not impacting the rate of the
And
current
we're
law
not
district.
sure if under the governor's proposal or under anything we might come up with, if we allow towns to raise money over and above the foundation funding, which will be raised on the statewide grand list, then your local property value matters either as a local, depending if that decision can be made by local schools or if it's made district wide. So if your district wide is relatively the same, I guess, in all districts, it would maybe alleviate some of the Brigham concern.
Yeah, so I'm in no way the Brigham expert.
Yes,
I live more comfortably in the world of spreadsheets
we
and
will,
numbers
we
and
will get the
data.
lawyers in.
So I
about
would
Brigham.
Need to really phone a friend,
Yeah.
Don Gray or Beth St. James, to talk through Brigham
Yeah.
considerations.
We definitely.
And I will say that all of this, of course, as you all know, are policy questions, policy
Mhm.
decisions. So going down the path of a foundation formula, if that were to be the policy choice that would be made, another policy choice in relation to that would be, do you allow districts to spend above that foundation formula amount? If so, how is that amount spending over the foundation formula amount? How is that money raised? Is it a shared statewide grand list? Is it a district grand list? Is another revenue stream? I mean, those are all policy choices.
Well, on top of that, there's the policy choice of how even the foundation stuff is raised. That, I mean, how any of the revenue is raised is separate, is separated from the foundation formula is distributing the money. It's not collecting the money.
Right,
Absolutely.
and we still have to determine that, and we
Right.
still haven't got an estimate as to. I guess we have some estimates, kind of loosely, they haven't been formally given to us about what the total amount raised would be. I haven't heard anybody talk about what a tax rate would be. We have some proposals about a new income sensitivity or house site deduction based on income, but I don't know. When this all comes together, what's it gonna look like for the individuals?
Absolutely. And that's something that we are working on we being JFO, we're working on understanding. And it's also a question, I can't speak to the administration's proposal, the details of the proposal. How those numbers were determined. I'm working to get up to speed on that. But those questions really are best directed to the Agency of Education and or the Department of Taxes, depending on, or the governor's office.
Before we move forward, we're going to want to be able to give JFO enough information so that they can do confirming or not confirming calculations. And we haven't reached that point yet, I gather, where.
Yeah, so a lot of the preliminary modeling has been shared with us. I will also say that the Agency of Education and their consultants shared, believe what they referred to it as a streamlined model with Ways and Means this morning. So we have received a lot of information and data. We're working to get up to speed on it. And so for some of the details of the proposal, we're still asking some questions to understand. And then there's also of course, this is a policy proposal. And there are explicit policy choices and implicit policy choices. And so moving forward, we need to understand all of those explicit and implicit policy choices. And if we need to model something for all of you, we need to understand what are the policy choices that you want us to include in our modeling. So that's why today I'm really just sticking to, here are the 5 proposed districts. These districts, the consolidated districts, I have this in the next slide. The administration has confirmed with me that I've got all of the right consolidation in here, but this should look familiar. This is, I'm pulling this from one of the recent slide decks. And the proposal proposes to eliminate the supervisory union structure and consolidate our 119 school districts into 5 regional school districts, which we see in this map here. And so I'll be focusing on these 5 proposed districts and what they look like in terms of grand list values. So getting into these proposed school districts and their equalized grand lists. So in short, the percentage share of the total grand list value varies significantly by school district, proposed school district. So you'll recall the total grand list value, right? That's the sum of all real taxable property. In the state, I'm using preliminary, very close to final, but still technically preliminary fiscal year 25 grand list data. And what we see here is that the Champlain Valley region has the largest percentage of total grand list value at 39% of the state's grand list. The Northeast region proposed district has the lowest percentage at 9%. So here in the table, have those numbers aggregated up to the school district, the proposed districts, where you can see that total equalized meaning 100% fair market value, and then also the percentage of the state total. Before going, I don't know if this is going to derail us or not, but I'm going to say it anyways. In case one of the questions is, well, what are all of the towns that are making up the regions and what are the grand list values? So I'm not going to walk through it now unless that's helpful.
But that's all.
But I've included 3 PDFs with my testimony today. One of these PDFs has the proposed region district and then broken out by municipality, by jurisdiction. And then I've also included the homestead equalized grand list and the non-homestead equalized grand list. And together that's the total. So that provides the insight into essentially all of this is being summed up to get us into these high level numbers we're looking at here.
Provided it isn't going to derail us.
I just want to know, can I get that in a spreadsheet with the county column too?
Yes. Absolutely. I will also, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but a little bit later, we're talking about long-term median, so pupil counts. And I do also have 2 other PDFs that I can provide in a spreadsheet that have the proposed districts, the county, the current law school district, and the long-term ADM. And I sorted this by region, and I also provided one that was sorted by county because I'm in the Senate. So I will
We always go to our county first.
yeah. I can send the spreadsheets to Charlotte to share with the committee. I know that there's an issue in terms of posting spreadsheets on the General Assembly website. I think there's just like some IT thing going on there. So that's why I've included them in PDF. But yes, I will share the Excels.
That could be fun.
I think so. So those are the other documents that I have under my name. And that's really how we're getting up to these aggregated numbers, right? We've got all of the towns in each one of these districts, their grand list value. For visual folks, I've included a pie chart. This is showing the exact same thing that we're just looking at in a table where you can see that 39% is Champlain Valley, Northeast region has 9%, et cetera.
So how do we put part of the northeast to the Chittenden Valley? Or part of Chittenden? Because the others are fairly equal, not radically off.
I think there's something important to remember here. That Champlain Valley has 3 to 4 times the population of cities of these other
Yeah.
districts as well. Yeah.
Yes, I appreciate that. And so where we're going in the presentation is right now we're looking solely at grand list value by district, by proposed district.
Yeah.
Then we're looking at pupil count by proposed district. Then we're looking at grand list value per pupil count in proposed district.
Okay,
So this is step 1 of sort of 3 steps.
okay. So let's let you walk us through this.
Next, this is homestead and non-homestead, so taking that total and parsing it out. I thought this was really interesting to see where some district of the proposed districts have the same statewide share of homestead grand list and non-homestead, while other districts have a larger share of the state's homestead grand list or non-homestead grand list. So for instance, we can see Champlain Valley has 46% of the statewide homestead grand list and has 33% of the statewide non-homestead grand list.
So to my friend that's not at the table, but maybe Senator Brock would echo this, I just see the southeast region, that imbalance or the inverse from what Champlain Valley has with regards to homestead versus non-homestead. And that's where I'm sorry, I was reorienting myself. That keeps coming up in economic development and how there needs to be more of that attention down in the Rutland area. I didn't make my point well enough.
Yeah,
but
Southeast
see,
is not
it's-
Rutland.
Yeah,
Southeast is Rutland.
Well, I think it
Yeah.
doesn't,
Brattleboro.
it's Brattleboro, yeah.
Well, it proves something that we all know, our regions are different.
right.
I
So
mean,
Winooski Valley, we're equal in everything.
I'm just, it's probably just the delta between average home price. Is what's driving it.
This is non-homestead.
Non-homestead, no.
So one of the caveats or considerations that I have at the end of the slide deck is it's also important to note that this analysis is looking at, as you're noting, the aggregated school district. So we're not looking at the number of parcels. We're not looking at the median value of a parcel. We're not looking at the spread. We're really looking at summing up all of the value within these 5 proposed districts.
I'm sorry, thank you.
It does, yeah.
To the point that you were, or the conversation you were all just having, these are all the same percentages that you just looked at, but I thought it was interesting to look at the percentage of the grand list value, the total grand list value, the homestead and the non-homestead, and how that percentage of the share of the state is differing based on what grand list you're looking at. So in terms of considering taxation, considering policy choices, seeing that there is a difference based off of those choices.
I'd like to see that by county. The homestead, non-homesteads by county. Just thinking,
Can we do that with the spreadsheet stuff that you're sending?
do we have non-homestead and homestead breakout in those columns?
In the spreadsheets that you're sending?
I can try to include that.
Not if it's a.
I think the largest
You
spreadsheet.
can do a pivot table off 2 sheets, yeah. I can get it. Pardon?
It is fun, isn't it?
I enjoy good Excel spreadsheet myself.
Yeah.
So anyways, so that's where we're looking at the shakeout of share within these districts. So then moving to the next piece, to Senator Beck's point of, we also have significant variance of population across these districts, pupil count. So this is getting into the pupil count. So before getting into the numbers, we'll recall long-term average daily membership, LTADM, is essentially like the count, a way of counting students. It can be used for counting students in a school district across the state. Specifically, we take the district's average daily membership over 2 years and then add in state place students for the most recent of those 2 years. So it's really the metric that Vermont uses, the agency uses in terms of counting kids before applying the weights. This is also the metric that weights are applied to. You'll recall that when we're looking at weighted pupil counts, it's long-term weighted average daily membership. I'm not talking about weights at all in this presentation.
This is actual kids sitting in actual seats as close as we can do.
Yep.
I think, weeded out the ghost students,
Mhm.
which we did that, I believe, with 46. I don't think we have any more ghost students floating around.
Yeah,
This
so,
is actual bodies.
yep. So this is also using FY25 data. The long-term median in the state is 83,368. And as we all know, this figure has been declining over time. So this is looking at a snapshot FY25. So now thinking about it in the proposed school districts, similarly, we see Champlain Valley having 41% of the total long-term ADM and the Northeast region having the lowest percentage of 12%. All of these tables are all sorted in the same way. They've been sorted alphabetically.
And Winooski Valley has been holding at 18% of everything.
That's yours.
You're at.
We are out.
Same thing, same colors. This is a visual where you see Champlain Valley having
But
the
in this one,
largest share.
Northeast region is pretty much equal with the other than Champlain. It's the other four are fairly equal.
More kids, smaller grams.
More
Yeah.
kids
As a
per gram, yeah.
yeah.
So that was just the pupil snapshot, the long-term ADM snapshot. And now getting into the equalized grand list per long-term ADM. So this is one way. I think that the administration has presented some tables using a similar metric of comparing districts by taking the grand list value per long-term ADM. It is a way, really a way to compare the spread. So going to the total equalized grand list per long-term ADM. So you'll recall we're calculating this amount by saying, okay, I keep using Champlain Valley because it's at the top of it's the top row. But for Champlain Valley, we have this much total equalized grand list. We then divide it by this many long-term ADM, and that's our per ADM grand list value.
You've got $1 million per student. Is that with that $1 million for
1.4.
1.4 million?
So a few other things I think that are helpful on here to consider. I've included on these tables the median. So which region is sitting the center, the middle of the districts. So here, when using the total equalized grand list, we see Champlain Valley as the median. We see Northeast as the lowest and Southeast as the highest. Calculating that ratio to determine the spread, how big is the difference between the lowest grand list value per pupil and highest grand list value per pupil, we see is 2.0. But between when calculating the ratio between Northeast region and Southeast region.
Yeah, almost exactly.
Yeah. I was trying to decide if I should do 1.99 because that's what we're rounded to, or 2.0, but I stuck with 2.0.
2.0.
One decimal. There's a lot of numbers in the slide, but yeah, 2.0. And then I did the same thing for same rationale, but then doing it homestead and non-homestead. So just focusing here on the homestead grand list first, we're taking of the district, the total homestead grand list, dividing it by the pupil count, the long-term median. And that's how we're getting that per number that we're looking at here. Here we see that now Winooski Valley is the median when looking solely at the homestead value per pupil. We see Champlain Valley is the highest and Northeast is the lowest. So the ratio there is 1.6 when looking solely within homestead. The math is the same for non-homestead. We're just using the other piece of the grand list, right? And here we see now Southwest is the median when looking at non-homestead grand list, Northeast being the lowest, and now Southeast being the highest. And the ratio between these, the lowest and the highest, is 2.5. So I then just took these comparisons that we're just looking at, summarize it here, and we can see that depending if we're looking at the total grand list or the homestead grand list or the non-homestead grand list, we're going to see different medians and different highest per grand list per pupil. There are a few considerations that I just wanted to include here that I was thinking about while doing this analysis that really wanted to include an emphasis that what we're looking at here is representing student counts and grand list values for fiscal year 25, right? We're not talking about changes in valuation or student counts in future years. We know that student counts and grand list values will change in future years. Demographic shifts, policy shifts, economic shifts. And we also know that these future changes likely won't be uniform across the state. So some districts may be more impacted than others. So we're really looking at a point in time, all else equal. And finally, we did talk to this, but I'll say it again that this presentation hasn't talked at all about grand list variance within the proposed districts. So we haven't talked about parcel counts, range of property values, median property value within a district. So that is, those are all of the slides I prepared, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
What does this tell us? I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around.
So
The greatest variance seems, unsurprisingly, is between the Northeast and the Northwest. The other three seem to be, they change positions slightly depending on what it is, but they stay relatively stable and relatively similar. Probably have a balance of non-homestead, some resort kind of areas, some, homestead. We have a concentration of both homestead value and non-homestead in the Northwest. And we have a lack of everything in the Northeast. I'm just trying to figure out what this tells us when we're looking, and we haven't even talked about cultural similarities, since cultural differences came up frequently when we were doing Act 46. And so I don't know.
I
I've
think-
been doing the most.
Yeah, I think what it tells us, and Julie wasn't asked to come in with it, but I mean, what it tells us is that the fewer the district, number of districts you have, the less the variation is going to be between the grand list amongst districts. If this was modeled for 12, it would be way greater than 2-1 if it was. That's what it's.
Well, I mean, as Julia said at the beginning, and we all know that our current system, the grand list for the for raising the revenue doesn't matter because it's
Right.
it's raised statewide.
Right.
So the variation only matters if you're contemplating a different type way of raising
That's right.
revenue. And so I think that the administration has tried to decrease the variation because they are contemplating a different way of raising revenue that doesn't equalize as well. Particularly the revenue that might be the quote unquote extra revenue that allows districts to raise above and beyond the foundation. So if we don't go with that and we come up with a revenue raising formula that is similar to what we have now, or some type of statewide revenue raising that doesn't matter what the grand list is, then the variation between districts doesn't matter.
That's right. Yeah, that's just.
She just said a property tax rate per 100-acre dollars of about parcel value across the whole state, independent of districts.
I mean, that's how the foundation's formed.
Yeah.
Right.
It just becomes a problem when you allow for variation across
Right.
districts. So
That's
that
right.
the wealthier districts can raise
Yep.
more if you're allowing that to happen. And that's when you get into a problem with right on the
Yeah.
board, essentially. But
The less variation. So what happens if we divide the northwest in half?
well, I think it just means that we have to be more careful with how we're raising the revenue,
Yeah.
which, there hasn't been as much discussion, I mean, or any discussion really about how they're raising the revenue. There's been discussion about the foundation formula. But there's been very little discussion. I think there's like one line in their slide presentation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jake, but it just says, like statewide, homestead tax rate or something like that, or there's like almost no detail about how they're raising the revenue.
Because nothing has been said, I'm assuming that we're using the same kind of revenue structure unless we change it that we now have, which is property tax, sales tax, a bunch of other taxes, smaller amounts. And we have a lot of necktie stripes on the maps we saw yesterday. I would say the majority of states seem to do some mixture. There's a couple like us that, but there are some where the state just taxes everything and schools get funded out of the general fund, but your property tax at some percentage goes in. There's some that fund schools with 3 and 4 taxes. We don't have things like, I was told that Mississippi, one of them has a slaughterhouse tax. At least when we were interviewing a city manager, we don't have extraction taxes because we don't have anything that anyone wants to extract except maybe water. And I'm not sure how much of that's being piped out since everybody seems to be doing bottled water these days. So we have less choices than some other states as to what we can tax. But you can always find something else.
To your presentation, I'm still trying to understand the the inverse relationship between non-homestead and homestead between the Northwest and the Southeast. Do you have any general conjecture as to why there is an inverse ratio of non-homestead to homestead across those two alternate points of Vermont? Because it's closer to Massachusetts, their non-homestead is worth more.
I don't know.
Ski towns?
Are those ski towns? We got some in your, you got Stowe.
Yes, I do. I have Riverbush.
Where's
But there's several, Mount Snow, there's several,
What
and
about like?
down in the more southern part of the state. I think
Prices in Chittenden County are really high, is what you're saying?
That's.
Okay. Don't need to raise your home price.
other than
There are a lot of
Bolton, yeah,
apartment
other
buildings
than
down there.
Bolton, you don't have a ski area.
Yeah.
The Kingdom's
Is that a
got
big
Birch
industry there?
Mountain and
Jimmy.
JP.
I don't know enough about their.
But there doesn't seem to be the kind of second home development.
Well, yeah,
yet
I'm trying to find in
around
that
those.
presentation.
We have
one of their.
Oh, they used to give out-
Yeah, I drove around and
What they
looked
say
at all of that area. I didn't see the kind of second home development that I'm seeing
I'm not sure.
in
I don't know
Stowe
if
or
if
even
that
Sugar
was
Bush.
I was expecting the
finalized.
opposite. I almost
your question?
expected the non-homestead in Chittenden County to be disproportionately.
Oh,
I don't know what's going on here.
oh no, that's southeast.
More
Are we?
houses.
Yeah, southeast has Killington, Stratton,
Yeah.
I would need to look into it.
Woodstock.
Yeah,
Oh, Woodstock, yeah.
Woodstock.
Can we fix it southeast?
Yeah, I was thinking that would be right. Isn't that Rutland County?
They answered your question, what does this tell us?
It just tells us that there is, I think it puts in numbers what most of us instinctually knew, that the biggest difference was going to be between Chittenden County and the Northeast Kingdom. That the rest of us are similar, but we vary, but not radically. But how you use that information in setting up districts depends on the goal you want to achieve in that district. Is that something, it's useful information when we go to start doing our Lego block building as to what goes into a district, or if we decide just to leave it alone like it is, or
And if I may add one more piece that I was thinking about while I was doing this is, I think that this is a numbers way of showing that decisions and policy choices and definitions really do matter in the context of making some of these property tax decisions, because you see differences for total grand list, homestead grand list, and non-homestead, and how it shakes out over the state. And I think that's where a lot of these, where I'm also hearing a lot of your questions getting to.
I just heard you say, this is gonna have an effect, or it will depend on what each district wants. And what I keep hearing is that this is all about equity across the state, and we're gonna have a statewide curriculum, and it should all be. So I don't even see the relevance of differences between districts, because that's not the end goal.
well, if we allow raising money over and above, then it becomes important, because then we have freedom. If we put in enough money with an adequate inflator, then we won't have to raise money, and every student, depending on their needs, will get the same student in every district will get the same amount of money, and it will be dollars, not taxing capacity. But we've got a long way to go before we get there.
That's where my mind is going as well. And I'm wondering maybe if others have more insight on this, are they thinking about this ratio as somehow going to be applied to any possible
So I mean, I think there's some things that have yet to come out of the barn. One is, will districts be allowed to spend beyond the foundation?
This ratio it back.
Two, how much might they be allowed to spend beyond the foundation? And three, would there be an intent for that spending beyond the foundation to have an equalization mechanism that takes into account these different grand lists? And I know those are ideas that are being discussed. They're not out of the barn yet. They probably will be shortly, but
Can I add to that then?
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
this proposal is still.
yeah.
So if that's the direction they're going in. What my interests are is I want to see the county modeling, and I also want to see a more rational modeling of just looking at existing school districts where we would achieve school districts of between 4,000 and 8,000 pupil count. And I don't know what that breaks down, but take 82,000 divided by 6,000. That's like the 25 possible districts that it could be, but rationally defining them and looking at that same ratio. And if that ratio is then used for some sort of taxation policy, that's where my mind is going. Because the 5 districts is a hard sell for me. And I just don't know if my constituents are going to get behind that type of massive conglomeration of centralized control. And so I'm kind of trying to see how they're thinking about this ratio for some smaller configuration.
Have you, Julia, have you done that, this type of thing on a county or
I haven't,
variation, determinant variation?
I haven't done all of this on, different districts. Like I don't have anything right now that I can pull up. It certainly is feasible. I mean, we have the data. The big question is if it were to be on a county basis, sure, I'm happy to do that and come back to the committee. If it's getting to the idea of districts with 4,000 to 8,000 students, I would need policy direction in terms of where those boundaries would be.
Yeah,
So I think
first
just-
we need to-
Just doing it on the county basis isn't gonna quite get it because you're gonna run into districts that cross county lines. That happens. Just my county is one of the easiest counties to do. And even in my county, around the edges, there are school districts or towns that go to different county districts. So I think what Senator Chittenden is saying is like, what rational way to do it? And that's not fair to just say to Julia, come up with some rational way for us to do this, you know? So. Yeah, so I think having those spreadsheets that you can send to Charlotte and we can mess around with them a little bit, maybe will give us some way to help not overwhelm Julia with like 8 different ways. Can you do 8 different ways for us, kind of thing, but.
Well, and when you look at counties, even within almost every county that you can pick, there are wide variances.
Oh, yeah.
And you can do that even in Chittenden County, you can find 4 town relative to something else. So.
And that's why we have a system that equalizes across, tax fees, because that's
In theory.
why it does on the revenue side very, very well. It's the expenditure side that it does it less well.
Expenditure, and we have, I think, several goals. One is to make sure that every child has an equal access to education, and that kids in poorer towns are not getting less. The other one is to save some money, because if cost weren't an issue, we could all design a wonderful education system. But we've kind of reached a wall as to what we can spend. So we're trying to find a way that will, I think, the proposal is to find us some economies of scale. Is this too big a scale? There seems to be a feeling that this is too big a scale. So how do we scale it back? I know at one point they were talking about 12 districts, which was pretty much countywide. I don't know that they did any more other than look at it, but I did see a map pop up, I think in the commission of 12 districts.
Yeah, so I can't comment on, as I know you all know, but I'll say it out loud, I can't comment on what they did or did not consider. Back to, I think it was Senator Hardy's point, I would also flag again, if the consideration is to go down to solely, like, next step, let's consider counties, then the question is, what about the school districts that cross county lines? And Jim, are you splitting them up, or are you putting, you know, if they're on the border, if they're in two counties, saying, nope, we're not gonna split up the school district. Instead, we're gonna put this school district into one of the counties,
Yeah.
regardless of the fact that it's crossing county lines.
And if you're raising the total cost from the total grand list, and then I've got Martin. It shouldn't matter if you just say this school is in this county. Because you're not going to be raising the money on the county grand list, you're going to be raising it on the state grand list, at least now. It all comes to, do you raise extra, and then on whose grand list do you raise it?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that, because this plan / scheme has been packaged as equity, that has been one of the key words, that when we're talking about poor communities and poor kids, it's not that they are not getting enough. It's that they get more. That is key to equity. And I think we all need to keep that in our minds as we're looking at this.
Yes, and one of the things we heard yesterday is that, other than say you're a child from a poor family, some schools say this school, 50% of the students are from poorer families, and therefore they get
A concentration.
they get more than a school district that has 5 or 6 poor kids, that there's an extra weight for concentration of. And at this, I don't know if we want to look at mental health needs. That seems to be a brand new issue that's out there that needs special attention. That is one of the cost drivers. And then there's healthcare.
The revelation I have from this discussion that I just want to explore more over the weekend, and I keep looking at my friend Scott, who's been Senator Beck, who has been diving into this for some time, is that the approach, the ratio between grand lists and pupils within those districts? And then if so, I feel a lot less confined by that superintendent region and a county region. And I feel like we could start looking at current school districts and the grand list within those school districts and start using that.
It doesn't really matter unless you're trying to fund it differently than that we're doing it now. And not the foundation formula is a formula about how you spend the money and distribute the money. It's not a formula about how you raise the money. So the grand list is important when you're talking about how you're raising the money. And our formula right now makes it equal across the state, more or less. And so if we're moving away from a formula that does that, then those ratios about grand list matter. But if we're not, then it's going down a rabbit hole we don't need to go down, and there are other things that are more important to consider.
Agreed.
And the other thing is, if we do not change the sizes at some level, we are not going to achieve the savings, because our biggest cost is personnel. And when you're paying personnel, you don't have, no one's talking about classes of 75 or even 30 students. We're talking about classes of more than 5, 3, maybe 10 to 15. But when you've got a school with 24 students in the school, you can't do that. So we're going to have to do some consolidation. Now, if that's involves, this one is consolidating districts and decision making. We can do a different one, but there's two things we're supposed to be achieving here. Because if all we do is change the districts and nobody's tax bills, if tax bills keep going up, and then we will put a lot of interest in it, and no one is going to be any happier than they are right now.
Just throw out there, so the variation here on this 5 is 2 to 1. Which, to your point, if you don't do a foundation model, it doesn't matter, but, the 12 district model, I don't exactly know what the 12 districts were.
It was close to count.
Sort of county basis. I think the variation was 10 to 1. So it's significantly different. The other thing I think, and this is probably not a conversation for this room, but it is a conversation. You know, wherever you draw a line, you're gonna have towns on either side of the line where it doesn't work in one way, shape, or form for whatever reason. None of which has to do with funding or finance. The more lines you draw,
The more,
the more
yeah.
of those that you're going to have. And I don't know if that means 5 or 12 or 20 or whatever, but
Right. Ask anyone who's done reapportionment in the legislature.
Do we need to prove out that 10 to 1? Just, I mean, are you absolutely confident? I kind of want to see
Yeah.
the county break.
Yeah,
out
I
just for
mean,
my own edification.
I'm pretty confident on that number. I mean, it's at some point, somebody will probably come in and do this on it.
I believe you, I want to see it, just to be persuaded that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't believe me?
I mean, there are just a lot of considerations beyond the sort of the grand list consideration, which is what we're focusing on today. But in terms of where to draw the lines or how many lines to draw. And some of it is also about resource allocation, but a lot of it is about governance and transportation and, you know.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about.
All the transition plan, which I haven't seen any transition plan. You know, there's just a lot of things that, and I don't know how long we're gonna wait for these details.
We
or
are, we are,
when we're gonna
going
actually
to
just dig into doing our own thing.
And I think we're looking for some reduction in tax burden. That's one goal. And an increase in equity meaning access to educational resources. That seems to be the twin goals that we've been asked to do. And if somebody, you know, there are other goals in there, we probably should get those out. And then we can start looking at how does this work? Because if money isn't an object, we can do a lot of things. If money is an object, then that's going to limit some of the things we can do. I think one of the things it limits is staying with the status quo number of a district, a union, you know, and how do we, you know, achieve or raise enough money to provide equity and also fairness to taxpayers. And then you start with, so how do you divide it up to do that? And no, nobody, I think, yes. The more you divide it up, the smaller it is, the more, the more angst you're going to have amongst individuals and individual towns. I
Less than what we
don't,
have now.
oh, you have a lot more.
Well, I don't know. I think it can also go the other way.
Yeah.
Is that if you make it too big, there's gonna be a lot of angst. I mean, there are.
There are.
It's gonna be Ames.
People are just gonna be like, yes, there's gonna be angst, but like, I think you can make this the exact opposite argument and then there'd be like, you know, right now, people really value local control
Yes.
and to, you know, the less local control there is, the more people are gonna be freaking out about what decisions they're not able to have a say in. And right now, the governance structure that's been proposed with these 5 districts is a radical change from what we have right now.
Yeah, and we can work on that. I mean, it will depend. On Monday, I'm hoping we're supposed to get in terms of how the money flows, what the vision is, who gets the money at what level, who makes what decisions at that level. How does the money go down? How many levels are there below that? What, if any, decisions get made below that big central school board? Those are the questions that are going to have to get filled out as to how much local decision-making and control do we build into this system? This will be a radical change, and we're going to have to adjust. We're going to have to perhaps transition, not take it all the way the first year. I think we may have to raise some transition money. Just we're going to have to build or add on somewhere. We're going to have to do a lot of stuff. This time I've got Martine, then Tom.
Thank you. Just because equity, again, that's what I'm being told this is all about. We also, I think, will need to, well, yes, absolutely. We're being told, I believe we're being told now too, that we're gonna have this universal voucher system, which is gonna require public dollars to go to private schools.
That's the governor's proposal.
I'm just saying, with it, I want to see where that is equitable because it's been proven time and time again to not be equitable. It's the opposite of equitable.
It may not be equitable. There's also the possibility that we may find out that federal funds get tied to a voucher system. So we will deal with that if and when it ever happens.
That would be a moral dilemma.
It would be a very big dilemma in this state, but it's not. We saw the number of states yesterday that do that. Mostly 7 states. And I think that's not a public school system we want to go to. But we're going to have to deal with the hand that gets dealt. Right now, we're going to proceed under the present circumstances. In all things, until those circumstances change. But the further we are along in this discussion, the easier it will be to make the change. Whatever or maybe we won't have to change. But we will see. But that is not because the governor says it doesn't make it so. We're taking what's proposed and we can add, subtract, accept or reject.
2 things I heard you say I want to pick up on, to me just circling back. So I believe, I remember hearing the administration say this is really looking at a 3-year trend. I mean, we're not changing
it's at
this
least
year.
3
This is at least 3. So this is like a 3, if I'm not mistaken. And then the other piece, you said we're going to get something on Monday. I'm just feeling, I'm hearing angst about starting to see some black and white legislative language on this. Do we know if we're getting something drafted?
I haven't heard of anything.
There's a
drafted.
PowerPoint.
Yeah, you got a PowerPoint
Well,
and,
language being drafted.
Okay.
It's over in the house.
Yeah.
We're drafting language.
and this will be a revenue bill, so the language
It's there.
will start there, and when it's produced,
Yeah.
we will get a copy, but as of right now, we have the proposal sheets, the slides, And we seem to get more detail every couple days. But we need to do our due diligence because we need to be able to evaluate information as it's brought to us. And we need to have, the House is also working on a plan. As they have all day, are ahead of us. I'm hoping to pick a few brains in here.
Is that why Ledge Council's so backed up? Just kidding.
I don't know, but yeah,
We lost some key people.
we're gonna get to look at the spill, I'm saying, yes, and after it drops, 6 to 8 weeks before the plants in the Senate,
Oh,
I
yeah,
think they're gonna have it for a while.
Yeah. I said, don't make plans for June.
That is just depressing and I
were
can't keep
here-
hearing that. I mean, that is
I know,
not.
but we were here that long when we did Act 60. It was my first year. I was in shock when we went home in April the second year. I thought we always went to June. And that
It's from May.
I think was a more united everybody. Because we had a Supreme Court decision saying you have to deal with that, and that gives you some momentum behind you, a sense of urgency. This one, we just have the voters. We will know in a couple weeks what the voters are going to say.
We make plans for July.
Well, I wouldn't make them in the state parks, because if we don't make a decision by July 1st, the entire state shuts down. I'm assuming that the budget will be held hostage, which has happened in the past. So I would plan. Sometimes they let everybody but the money committees go home.
We're a money committee.
Yeah, more money.
Dang it.
We're a last
So
money
we
committee.
need to, if we want to go home, we need to buckle down and get really serious about this and serious about what we want to do. And part of that is not just being negative about the governor's proposal, but to start being positive about what we want to move forward.
But we want to understand the proposals. We
Yes.
haven't had testimony in terms of what the government wants, what the governor wants to do regarding whether it be charter schools or independent. We haven't heard why. We haven't heard the rationale. And so one of our major tasks is to listen with an open mind in the short term, and then desirably set almost a date certain to say, okay, when do we start building based on what we've heard and what the other body is giving us?
And so far, we are still waiting. I read the Digger story this morning. I haven't heard any direct.
I haven't seen the Digger story even yet.
I don't know. I saw the Digger had
I've heard about it.
breaking news, and apparently it was something that was released in House Ed yesterday. Yeah. Yes, because Representative Conlon said it was a provocative idea.
They're getting the same brief down in Senate
Okay,
right now.
yeah, they're getting a briefing this afternoon. So we will continue to march forward.
Only the Hawaii solution of one district, and then we don't have to argue about it.
Well, that would be it. Or
Somebody introduced
do
that.
your 5
Yeah.
districts, with 5 different systems, and see which one works.
It's Friday, right?
Okay, it's been a long week. The weather's been a little stressful.
Been difficult weather.
Like those
It is
weekend.
almost 3:30, and I try and get you out of here by 3:30. Consider yesterday a bonus just because it was a blizzard. But we will be working along with this if we're going to get through half of what we need to get through this year. Because we are not going to get the cost of education under control unless we can get the cost of health insurance under control, and health insurance is ours. So, we need to deal with that. And that may mean that this year we don't get to deal with some other smaller bills. They may have to wait until.
That's some prioritization is critical and
Yeah.
we know what the priorities are.
So we do need